Hi, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about the show Castle Rock that just came out on Hulu. If you haven't heard about it, Castle Rock is a TV show that's not created by Stephen King, but it's set in Stephen King's, the universe that his works are set in. And so it draws on a lot of Stephen King stories, there's a lot of references to Stephen King, but it in and of itself is not a Stephen King story. It's a Stephen King, it's a story that's like other things Stephen King has written. It's like other guys trying to write a Stephen King story. Anyways, the basic plot of it is there's this creepy town called Castle Rock, and where there's a prison, Shawshank Prison, and it's about this creepy guy who's discovered locked up in the prison. So anyways, this is a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the show, or if you plan on seeing the show and you don't want to be spoiled, I'm going to be full on spoiling things, so now's your chance to turn it off. So I think Castle Rock is going to frustrate a lot of people. I know it definitely frustrated me. I think the writers definitely took some missteps in the storyline for this first season. I want to talk about it. I want to have an open discussion. I'm not totally hating on it. There are things about Castle Rock that I definitely enjoyed, but I wanted to talk about it because I think it's an interesting, it invites an interesting conversation about storytelling. Well, let's start with what I did like about the show. I like Stephen King. I like his stuff. I've read, not all of his books, I've read a lot of his books, and I really like his style. I really like his characters. I think he's a really good writer. I really like a lot of the adaptations that have been made on his stuff. And I really like the idea that these guys would try to expand that universe, and I really like the idea of Castle Rock being this creepy town where creepy things happen. So I was on board. When I knew this show was coming out, I was ready. One of the things I think the show does really well is, one of the things Stephen King does a lot in his works is he'll have, like, in his longer narratives, he'll have just like short chapters with like characters that are only in that short chapter, almost like a short story, just like injected into his book. It will have something to do with the larger narrative. So for example, in the book It, there's lots of short chapters where there's just a guy and you learn about this guy and then it kills him. It has nothing to do with the overarching story of the kids trying to kill it, but it helps, you know, the overall story. You get a sense of how evil it is from, you know, this thing. Stephen King does that a lot in his other books as well. So I was happy to see that. I think it's in episode 7. It starts off with these this couple that moves to Castle Rock, and they open this bed and breakfast. And there's this whole long opening sequence just about this couple, and then they kind of factor into the plot of the episode a little bit. But the episode's not about them. It's about the main characters we've been following, but they definitely play a role. And so it's like, it's taking this thing that Stephen King does, and it's using that device, which, you know, I thought was really good, especially in that episode 7. The show, for the most part, did a really good job of kind of building in this Stephen King universe, kind of referencing some of his other works, but not like directly stealing from them. It did tell its own unique story. There was 1 or 2 times where I was like, okay, I don't know if you're just like saying things that are Stephen King to say things that are Stephen King. But for the most part, it was pretty good. The setting of Castle Rock, this town that they found, Orange, Massachusetts, to film this show in, is super creepy and is exactly what I imagine the setting for a Stephen King story to be. The town's great. I really love the actor Terry O'Quinn. I've been a huge fan of his ever since he was in Lost as John Locke, and I was really excited when I found out he was going to be a part of this show. So every scene that he's in is just, it's magnetic. Love that guy. Thought he was like, he might have been my favorite part of the show. Honestly, wish we got to see more of him. And in general, I think all the performances of this show are really good. You know, with the actors, with what they were given, they all did a really good job. Cinematography is beautiful on this show. They do a really good job of setting the tone visually for Castle Rock. Castle Rock and what this town feels like, especially in episode 8. Episode 8 is like another level. It's like all visual storytelling, and it's really cool. I really like that episode. So yeah, like I said, the show does a really good job of being creepy. There's a lot of creepy scenes. Like there's this one scene where there's just a bunch of kids wearing these creepy masks, kind of having this meeting in this abandoned building, and you're like, this is really creepy. There's a lot. Bill Skarsgård, super creepy. He does a great job being creepy. And there's some other stuff as well that just like gets under your skin. I really love the first episode. The setup for this series is great, and it hooked me immediately. I was on board. I was like, this show is going to be fantastic. Didn't end up, with the same feelings, but this first episode does a great job of setting up the whole series, this situation. I also really like episodes 8 and 9. Those are probably my 3 favorites. I think those are the 3 best episodes. Yeah, episode 1, like, you are introduced to the situation. You get a lot of Terry O'Quinn. They find this kid in this prison. He's just been locked up there, and you don't know why. Terry O'Quinn is. You find out later he basically thinks this kid is the devil, and he's locked him up here to kind of keep him locked up. And so the whole time you're like, what is this kid gonna do? And does a great job of setting that up. So let's move on to what I don't like about the story, which will be a much longer conversation. So one of my main issues with the series is I wasn't sure what the story was that they were trying to tell. And that's not a good thing. Obviously the main issue, the main catalyst for this whole series of events is Terry O'Quinn. You realize this kid has been locked up, and so they kind of find him down there. And then he calls, they're like, what's your name? He's like, Henry Deaver. And Henry Deaver is a guy who used to live in the town of Castle Rock. And so they call up Henry Deaver. One of the prison guards calls him up and he's like, yo, there's this guy they found. They're trying to keep it secret, but he mentioned your name as his lawyer. And so they call Henry Deaver, and Henry Deaver comes back to Castle Rock. And that's kind of like what sets the show in motion. But there are kind of several storylines throughout the show. There's that one, Henry Deaver working with this kid, Bill Skarsgård, trying to figure out who he is, trying to get him legal help in this situation. As he gets progressively creepier. Sissy Spacek's character has Alzheimer's, and honestly, that's pretty much it for her storyline. She has Alzheimer's. You kind of eventually realize in episode 8 that she has been seeing the past, and kind of her mind kind of jumps around, and so she's really confused, and it kind of makes for a good episode, but it doesn't really do anything for the overall series. And then there's this whole question of Henry Deaver's memories. He has this troubled past where he disappeared for like 10 days, and then his dad died, and a lot of people his dad died when he went out to look for him, and a lot of people think that Henry might have had something to do with his dad's death, like he pushed him off a cliff or something, because that's how his dad died. He fell off a cliff, and then Henry Deaver just showed back up after his dad died. And he doesn't remember anything that happened, and so that's another ongoing storyline. He was like, what the heck happened to this kid? So those are the main storylines, but there's not like one goal. I think the main issue with the show is that there's no goal. They're not working towards anything. It raises these questions, who is the kid? What happened to Henry Deaver? But if I were to describe what happens in the show to you, it's difficult because there's nothing they're working towards. In a lot of Stephen King books, there is like in 11/22/63, the goal is to stop the assassination of JFK. Stop it. That's the goal. Misery. Get out of that lady's freaking house. This isn't just a Stephen King thing. This is just a storytelling thing in general. Usually, in stories, it helps if there is a singular goal that you're working towards. There isn't in this show. It's just kind of, the kid's in jail, he gets out, does some creepy stuff, kind of wanders around, and we're just trying to, waiting for them to do something and answer these questions. And they kind of tease us, and they're like, oh, eventually we're going to answer these questions. It takes a while. So who is this kid? Who is the kid? Bill Skarsgård? I don't know. I've watched the entire show. I still have no idea. And Henry's memories, what happened? We find out as an audience in the final episode, we find out part of what happened to him, what happened to his dad. But he still doesn't know. And the show does this tricky thing where in episode 9, it gives us a possibility of what happened to Henry Deaver. The kid tells a story, and which at the time you think is what happened, but then the next episode you learn that he might have made that whole thing up. And so what happened to Henry Deaver? Where'd he go? We still do not know definitively. So the two questions the show raises and asks us to care about the whole season, it doesn't answer. It does not answer those two questions. The next thing that I want to talk about is the characters. So the characters, they do have flaws, and we do understand where they're coming from. But personally, I didn't find myself really liking or rooting for any of the characters in this show up until episodes 8 and 9 when I finally started to care about some of them. Henry Deaver, he's kind of a douche. Helen Pangborn, douche. Ruth, Sissy Spacek's character, she's just kind of losing it. And, you kind of feel bad for her, but Molly, I think the actress did a pretty good job, but she's just awkward. Like, I kind of feel for her, but don't be awkward. The kid, creepy. And so I understand. The show does a good job of explaining, why these characters are the way they are, but I still don't like them. I still don't care about them. Just to give an example of something that could have made me care, this is an editing writing thing. They kind of have a mini love story between Henry and Molly. I think it happens around episode 4 or 5. So Henry and Molly, they're kind of like childhood friends. They get back together, kind of start talking about the situation with the kid. And Henry, in the douchey way that he is, hasn't really said too nice words to Molly. There's no real chemistry between them. And she's had a crush on him, like, since she was a kid. And one night they're just together, and they just kiss, and then they wake up the next morning, they're in bed together, they slept together, don't talk about it, doesn't show them, there's no passion, and it's just like business. It's just like something they did. Do they even care if they did it? Like, we don't know. They never talk about it again, really. There's no reason for us to care. It's just like, oh, and they slept together. It doesn't make us care, and that's a real moment they could have taken advantage of. Could have shown them liking each other, but they don't. Another character I really wish we had more of is Terry O'Quinn. I'm just gonna keep saying this. He's the guy. He was in the first episode, and then he was in like 2 other scenes the whole show. I really thought he's credited for all 10 episodes. Like, I really thought they were going to use more of him. Never going to get over that. Jane Levy, I really wish she was an interesting character. They try to do this thing where they make her a Torrance, so it's kind of a Shining reference. She's like his niece. She's an interesting character. She's like obsessed with the crazy things that have happened in the town, Castle Rock. And they kind of set it up like she's going to have a bigger part in this next season, maybe. We'll see. I really want to talk about episode 10. Episode 10 is just kind of where it all fell apart for me. So episode 8, I liked Sissy Spacek's character. I finally, was on board with her. I was like, okay, I can finally, I don't only understand her, I like her. I want her to be okay. And then you never see her again. And then she just dies at the end of episode 10. Nothing really to do with this plot at all. Episode 9, the kid, Bill Skarsgård, finally reveals to Molly everything that's happened to him. He tells her this story about what's happened to him, and it's the whole episode. And you find out that he comes from another kind of parallel universe where he is Henry Deaver, And in his world, young boy Henry kind of shows up, and they lock him up in a cage because bad things happen when he's around. Very similar to Bill Skarsgård in this Castle Rock universe that we've been watching. And eventually, him and Molly take this kid out into the woods. This other universe's Molly, not our Molly. They take young Henry Deaver out into the woods, and he kind of goes through this portal back to his universe along with Bill Skarsgård. So Bill Skarsgård comes to our universe, doesn't know what the heck's going on. Bad things happen when he's around. Cherry Quinn locks him up in the prison. Bill Skarsgård did a really good job in this episode, and I really understood him, and I really liked him. It changed everything that we've seen up to that point, because you can go back and watch it and you can say, man, if this kid, he's just been a victim this entire time and he can't control any of this stuff and he just wants to go home. It finally, the one thing this episode did is it finally gave us a goal. Bill Skarsgård wants to go home. That's great. That's a goal. I don't know why I didn't bring that up earlier, but that's a goal that I can get behind. And then the writers, if you watch kind of the behind the scenes stuff, and the writers are like, well, episode 9, we don't really know if he's telling the truth or not. We're going to go into that later. But you kind of get the sense that he may be, he may have made that up. And the characters have to decide whether or not they believe it. And that to me was like stab in the back. You got me excited. You gave me a goal. And now you're telling me it might not even be true, which is basically their way of saying, it's not true. We just wanted to mess with you. And then Bill Skarsgård actually is evil. And they do hinted that in episode 10. It's kind of like one of the big ideas in play in episode 10. There's one scene where Bill Skarsgård, he's in a prison. They're locked up in a prison, him and Henry Deaver. And Bill Skarsgård kind of watches. It does almost like he makes it happen. A group of prisoners are brought into the prison, and he just watches as they slowly begin to fight with each other and then kill each other. And then they kill the prison guards, and then the prison guards' keys slide across the room right at Bill Skarsgård's feet. And so Henry Deaver's like, whoa, is this kid making this bad stuff happen? Is he manipulating this for his benefit? Which, if that's the case, he's not so much of a victim. He actually wants this bad stuff to happen. He might actually be the devil. And if that's the story the writers are going with, then I think they need to tell us, they need to make that more clear that this episode 9 was just a story. They need to break it up and show, oh, okay, this is his recounting what happened, and then we get a better sense of, okay, he's just telling a story. It may or may not be true. One way they could do that is just by not showing it to us, just having him tell us everything. It would be like a really long story, but that's one way to do it, make that point clear. And then they could also show us more. Henry Deaver at one point, he's like, whoa, did you make that happen? But they need to give us more of that. If this is the storyline they're going with, make it a bigger point to say, okay, who the heck is this kid? And then the biggest thing is they need to answer the frickin' question. They didn't answer the question. We still have no idea who the kid actually is. Is he the devil? Is he being honest? Is he a monster? At one point in episode 10, his face freaking changes into a monster face, but we have no idea why. And that's the whole question of the whole series. Who is this kid? They don't answer it, which is the most frustrating thing for me. And like I mentioned before, Henry still doesn't know his past. We still don't really know who he is, if this kid is making this story up. We don't know what happened to him. So the show, Castle Rock, does not answer the only questions it dares to raise in its minimal, limited plot. And what makes this even more frustrating is that this is an anthology show that's been confirmed, so each season it's going to be its own storyline. So the way this storyline wrapped up, we're not getting any more, as far as we know. This is the end. And so basically what happens in episode 10 is, and the kid is trying to get to this place in the woods where he thinks he can get back home. And he thinks he needs Henry Deaver with him in order to do that, because that's what happened the first time. That's how he got sent to this place. And so he tries to convince Henry Deaver to come with him in the woods, and Henry Deaver's like, I'm not going with you in the woods. Finally, the kid gets him there at gunpoint, takes him into the woods, and right after they hear this sound, which is like a signal that, you know, they're getting close to the vortex or whatever, Henry Deaver tackles the kid, takes his gun, and then we cut to a year later, where we see the kid back in the same prison we found him in. Henry Deaver is now the one who is coming and feeding him, keeping him locked up here. He's kind of the caretaker. So he's kind of taking the place of Terry O'Quinn's character. And he's like, yeah, I think you're the devil. Pretty much you're stuck here forever. And the kid's like, haha, we'll see about that. Look what happened to Terry O'Quinn. Terry O'Quinn killed himself. Which brings up another question. If Terry O'Quinn really thought the kid was the devil, why didn't he just, like, kind of pass on his responsibility to the next, you know, owner of Shawshank? Why did he just let the kid go? Why didn't he try and find some sort of replacement for him, which is what ended up happening with Henry anyways. But that's another story. Okay? So basically we end up right where we started. The kid's in prison, except now it's Henry taking care of him. So it left me unsatisfied, and I know I'm not the only one. Obviously, it's the writer's show. They can do what they want. Apparently there are some people that liked it, that enjoyed it. I've been reading some reviews. Some people are on board. I think it's going to frustrate a lot of people. And I think if the writers don't do something to course correct, they're going to start losing their audience. It's my opinion. I personally am going to tune in for season 2. I'm going to give this show a second chance to see if they can redeem themselves, but we'll see. We'll see if I stick with it. Can't promise anything. Just some other nitpicky things. So I mentioned that there's some Stephen King Easter eggs that didn't really sit well with me. One of those is when Henry Deaver's son, Henry Deaver kind of sends his son home on a bus, and Henry Deaver's son gets off the bus. I don't even know his son's name. His son gets off the bus at a town called Jerusalem's Lot, which is a reference to Salem's Lot in the short story Jerusalem's Lot in the Stephen King verse. And it's just like a reference. I was like, oh, are there going to be vampires? But then the next episode, the kid just goes back to Henry Deaver. He just got off the bus at a town just to show the town. Okay, there's no story point to this. Molly's powers, she has like this ability to read other people's minds. I don't think that ever factors into the plot of the story at all. It doesn't help them at all, really, in any way. It's just a thing. It's like, oh, it's a Stephen King story. We gotta have someone with telekinetic powers. At the end, she just goes to Florida, and it doesn't really help anyone. The love stories, neither of them really did anything for me, Molly and Henry, and also they tried to really make a love story out of Alan Pangborn and Sissy Spacek, but I didn't really get that. I just kind of got that. I mean, they talk about how they like each other and how they wanted to be together, but you never really see them caring at all. Like I said, I will tune in for season 2. I'm really hoping to like it better than this, but we'll see. But if you guys seen it, have any thoughts about it, let me know. I'm interested. I want to talk about it. So comment below. Thanks, guys.